The Brandenburg Gate stands as a prominent symbol of Berlin and Germany. The gate is a landmark representing German history and unity. The Brandenburg Gate serves as a focal point for national celebrations and public gatherings. Modern Germany is characterized by a blend of cultural traditions and technological advancement. Germany's economic strength is supported by its industrial sector and renewable energy initiatives. The nation's vibrant culture and commitment to education contribute to its overall dynamism. A reverse time-lapse sequence visually represents the passage of time, moving backward through history. The sequence begins with the fall of the Berlin Wall, symbolizing recent historical events. The time-lapse progresses to the destruction of WWII, showcasing mid-20th century conflict. The sequence continues to depict medieval castles, representing the Middle Ages. The time-lapse culminates with Roman ruins, symbolizing ancient history. This cinematic technique compresses centuries of history into a brief but impactful visual representation.
Pre-Roman Germanic tribes and early settlements. The historical foundations of what would become Germany trace back to the Germanic tribes that inhabited Central Europe during the first millennium BCE. Archaeological evidence from the Hallstatt and La Tène periods reveals sophisticated Bronze and Iron Age cultures that established the cultural substrate for later Germanic development. The Germanic tribes, including the Cimbri, Teutones, Suebi, Cherusci, and numerous others, developed distinct social structures characterized by warrior aristocracies, tribal assemblies, and agricultural settlements. These early Germanic societies were organized around kinship groups and tribal confederations, with social stratification evident in burial practices and settlement patterns. The archaeological record from sites like Huneberg and Glauberg demonstrates sophisticated metalworking, trade networks extending across Europe, and complex religious practices centered on natural deities and ancestor worship. The Germanic tribes practiced a mixed economy of agriculture, animal husbandry, and craft production, with evidence of extensive trade relationships with Celtic, Roman, and Scandinavian peoples. Roman encounters and the Limes Germanicus. The collision between Germanic tribes and Roman imperial expansion fundamentally shaped early German history. Julius Caesar's campaigns in Gaul, 58 to 50 BCE, brought Rome into direct contact with Germanic peoples, particularly through encounters with Ariovistus and the Suebi. Caesar's ethnographic accounts, while colored by Roman perspectives, provide crucial insights into Germanic social organization, religious practices, and military tactics. The establishment of the Rhine frontier under Augustus marked a crucial turning point. The disastrous defeat of Publius Quinctilius Varus and 3 Roman legions at the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 CE, led by the Cherusci chieftain Arminius Hermann, effectively ended Roman attempts at conquering Germania Magna. This victory became a foundational myth in later German national consciousness, though its immediate impact was the consolidation of Roman defensive positions along the Rhine-Danube frontier. The construction of the Limes Germanicus, a fortified frontier system stretching from the Rhine to the Danube, created a permeable but significant boundary between the Roman Empire and Free Germania. This frontier zone became a crucial area of cultural exchange, with Germanic tribes serving as foederati, engaging in trade and gradually adopting certain Roman technologies and organizational methods while maintaining their distinct cultural identity. The Great Migrations and Germanic Kingdoms. The period from the 3rd to 6th centuries CE witnessed the complex phenomenon known as the Völkerwanderung, or Great Migrations. This era saw massive population movements, the fragmentation of the Western Roman Empire, and the establishment of Germanic kingdoms across former Roman territories. The causes of these migrations were multifaceted, including climatic changes, population pressure, political instability, and the attractive opportunities presented by Roman weakness. The Goths, divided into Visigoths and Ostrogoths, established kingdoms in Iberia and Italy, respectively. The Vandals created a powerful maritime empire in North Africa, while the Franks consolidated control over Gaul. The Anglo-Saxons settled in Britain, and the Lombards established dominance in northern Italy. These kingdoms represented not mere barbarian conquests, but sophisticated political entities that synthesized Germanic traditions with Roman administrative practices and Christian religious structures. Within the Germanic heartland, the Alemanni, Bavarii, Thuringi, and Saxons established territorial duchies that would form the basis for later medieval German political organization. These kingdoms developed complex legal systems, exemplified by the Lex Salica and other Germanic law codes that balanced Germanic customary law with Roman legal principles. Frankish hegemony and Carolingian integration. The rise of Frankish power under the Merovingian and subsequently Carolingian dynasties marked the beginning of political unification in what would become Germany. Clovis III's conversion to Catholic Christianity and his military victories over the Alemanni and Visigoths established Frankish hegemony over much of Gaul and western Germania. The Frankish kingdom's expansion eastward brought Germanic tribes under centralized political control for the first time since Roman attempts at conquest. The Carolingian period, particularly under Charlemagne, 768 to 814 CE, witnessed the creation of a pan-European empire that included most of modern Germany. Charlemagne's Saxon Wars, 772-804, finally brought the last major Germanic tribe under Christian Frankish control, though at enormous cost in lives and cultural destruction. The systematic destruction of the Irminsul and forced conversions represented a traumatic rupture in Germanic pagan traditions. Charlemagne's coronation as emperor in 800 CE revived the concept of Western imperial authority and established the precedent for the later Holy Roman Empire. The Carolingian Renaissance fostered educational and cultural development, with monasteries serving as centers of learning and manuscript preservation. The capitulary system provided a framework for imperial administration that balanced central authority with local customs and privileges. The emergence of the Holy Roman Empire. The division of the Carolingian Empire through the Treaty of Verdun, 843 CE, created the East Frankish Kingdom, which formed the core of what would become the Holy Roman Empire. Under the Ottonian dynasty, beginning with Otto I's victory over the Magyars at the Battle of Lechfeld, 955 CE, and his subsequent coronation as emperor, 962 CE, the German kingdoms achieved unprecedented political unity and European prominence. The Ottonian Renaissance represented a flowering of intellectual and artistic achievement, with imperial patronage supporting scholars like Gerbert of Aurillac, and artists creating masterpieces such as the Gero Cross and the illuminated manuscripts of Reichenau. The Ottoman system of governance relied heavily on the church as an administrative apparatus, with bishops and abbots serving as imperial officials. This Reichskirchen system created tensions that would later explode during the investiture controversy. The Salian dynasty, 1024 to 1125, continued the expansion of imperial power, but also faced the growing challenge of papal reform movements. The conflict between Emperor Henry IV and Pope Gregory VII epitomized the struggle between secular and spiritual authority that would define much of medieval German history. The dramatic scene at Canossa, 1077, where the emperor performed penance before the pope, illustrated the complex balance of power in medieval Europe. The Hohenstaufen dynasty, 1138 to 1254, marked both the zenith and crisis of medieval German imperial power. Under Frederick Barbarossa, the empire achieved its greatest territorial extent and cultural flowering, with the concept of the Holy Roman Empire as the successor to Rome reaching its full theoretical development. However, the Italian campaigns drained German resources and attention, while the growth of papal power and the rise of urban communes challenged imperial authority. Frederick II, the wonder of the world, represented the complexity of Hohenstaufen rule. His cosmopolitan court in Sicily, his scientific interests, and his complex relationship with Islam demonstrated the intellectual sophistication of the high medieval period. However, his conflicts with the papacy and the increasing independence of German princes set the stage for the interregnum and the fundamental transformation of German political structure. The period concluded with the Great Interregnum, 1250 to 1273, marking the effective end of strong imperial authority in Germany and the beginning of territorial fragmentation that would characterize German political development for centuries to come. The Great Interregnum and Rise of Territorial Princes. The Great Interregnum, 1250 to 1273, marked a fundamental watershed in German political development, effectively ending the possibility of strong centralized imperial authority and inaugurating an era of territorial fragmentation that would define German political structure until the 19th century. The death of Emperor Frederick II in 1250 and the subsequent extinction of the Hohenstaufen dynasty created a power vacuum that German princes exploited to consolidate their territorial authority at the expense of imperial power. During this period, the concept of Landesherrschaft, territorial lordship, emerged as princes transformed their administrative positions into hereditary territorial sovereignty. The ecclesiastical princes, including the archbishops of Mainz, Cologne, and Trier, along with secular princes like the Dukes of Saxony and Bavaria, established virtually independent principalities. This fragmentation was institutionalized through the development of territorial law codes, separate administrative systems, and distinct cultural identities within the broader framework of the Holy Roman Empire. The election of Rudolf III of Habsburg in 1273 ended the interregnum, but did not restore strong imperial authority. Instead, the Habsburg strategy focused on territorial acquisition and dynastic aggrandizement, establishing the pattern that would characterize imperial policy for centuries. The development of the electoral system, formalized in the Golden Bull of 1356, created a constitutional framework that balanced imperial dignity with princely autonomy, ensuring that the emperor remained dependent on the goodwill of the major territorial rulers. Urban development and the Hanseatic League. The late medieval period witnessed unprecedented urban growth and the emergence of German cities as major European commercial and cultural centers. The phenomenon of Stadtluft macht frei, city air makes free, reflected the transformative potential of urban life in a predominantly agricultural society. Cities like Cologne, Nuremberg, Augsburg, and Lübeck developed sophisticated governmental structures, impressive architectural monuments, and complex economic networks that connected German territories to broader European and Mediterranean trade systems. The Hanseatic League represented the most significant manifestation of German urban commercial power. Originating in the 12th century and reaching its zenith in the 14th and 15th centuries, the Hanse created a vast commercial network extending from London to Novgorod. The League's political and economic influence rivaled that of territorial princes, with Hanseatic cities maintaining their own diplomatic relations, military forces, and legal systems. The Hanseatic system was built on sophisticated commercial law, standardized currencies, and shared mercantile practices that facilitated long-distance trade. The development of the cog as a standardized ship design, the establishment of trading posts, Kontore, in foreign cities, and the creation of commercial law codes like the Lübeck Law provided the infrastructure for economic expansion. The League's influence extended beyond commerce to include cultural exchange, with German merchants serving as vectors for the transmission of ideas, technologies, and artistic styles across Northern Europe. Urban craft guilds, Zünfte, provided the social and economic foundation for urban prosperity. These organizations regulated production, maintained quality standards, and provided social welfare systems for their members. The guild system created a distinctive urban culture characterized by corporate identity, civic pride, and sophisticated artistic patronage. The masterpiece tradition and elaborate initiation ceremonies reflected the guild's role in maintaining craft traditions and social hierarchies. The Renaissance and humanism in German territories. The Renaissance reached German territories through multiple channels, creating a distinctive German humanism that synthesized Italian intellectual traditions with indigenous scholarly and religious concerns. The invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440 revolutionized the dissemination of knowledge and made German territories central to the European intellectual revolution. The printing centers of Mainz, Strasbourg, and Nuremberg became focal points for humanist scholarship and religious reform. German humanists like Johannes Reuchlin, Konrad Keltis, and Ulrich von Hutten developed philological methods that revolutionized biblical scholarship and classical studies. Reuchlin's work on Hebrew language and Jewish texts challenged traditional Christian approaches to Old Testament interpretation, while Keltis's recovery of classical texts and poetic innovations established German literature as worthy of serious scholarly attention. The emergence of universities like Heidelberg, Leipzig, and Tübingen created institutional frameworks for humanist scholarship. The Northern Renaissance in German territories was characterized by its religious orientation and practical applications. Unlike Italian Renaissance humanism, which often emphasized secular themes, German humanists remained deeply concerned with religious reform and moral improvement. This orientation prepared the intellectual ground for the Protestant Reformation, while also contributing to Catholic reform movements. Artistic developments paralleled intellectual changes, with German artists like Albrecht Dürer, Hans Holbein, and Lucas Cranach achieving international recognition. Dürer's innovative printmaking techniques and theoretical writings on art established German visual culture as a major European force. The development of woodcut and engraving techniques made German art accessible to broader audiences while creating new markets for artistic production. The Protestant Reformation and religious warfare. The Protestant Reformation, beginning with Martin Luther's posting of the 95 Theses in 1517, represented the most significant religious and political upheaval in German history since the Christianization of the Germanic tribes. Luther's theological innovations, including justification by faith alone, the priesthood of all believers, and scriptural authority, challenged fundamental Catholic doctrines and papal authority. However, the Reformation's success depended as much on political and social factors as on theological arguments. The Holy Roman Empire's decentralized structure provided numerous opportunities for religious innovation to find political protection. Princes like Frederick the Wise of Saxony protected Luther from imperial and papal persecution, while urban magistrates in cities like Strasbourg and Nuremberg implemented religious reforms that reflected both theological convictions and political calculations. The development of territorial churches, Landeskirchen, under princely authority created the foundation for the later principle of cuius regio, eius religio. The Peasants' War of 1524 to 1525 demonstrated the radical potential of Reformation ideas when applied to social and economic grievances. The peasant armies that devastated much of southern and central Germany drew inspiration from evangelical preaching and reformist ideas about social justice and biblical equality. The savage suppression of the peasant rebellions, supported by both Catholic and Protestant princes, illustrated the limits of religious reform and the determination of established authorities to maintain social order. The formation of the Schmalkaldic League in 1531 marked the militarization of religious conflict within the Holy Roman Empire. The alliance between Protestant princes and cities created a formidable political and military force that challenged imperial authority and Catholic unity. The subsequent Schmalkaldic Wars, 1546 to 1547, 1552 to 1555, demonstrated the impossibility of resolving religious divisions through military force alone. The Peace of Augsburg, 1555, established the legal framework for religious coexistence within the Holy Roman Empire through the principle of cuius regio, eius religio. This settlement recognized both Catholicism and Lutheranism as legitimate religions, while granting territorial rulers the authority to determine their subjects' religious affiliation. However, the exclusion of Calvinism and other Protestant denominations created ongoing tensions that would eventually explode in the 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War and the Peace of Westphalia. The 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, represented the culmination of religious, political, and dynastic conflicts that had been building within the Holy Roman Empire since the Reformation. Beginning with the defenestration of Prague and the Bohemian Revolt, the conflict evolved from a localized religious dispute into a European-wide struggle that devastated German territories and fundamentally altered the European balance of power. The war's progression through distinct phases: Bohemian, 1618 to 1625, Danish, 1625 to 1629, Swedish, 1630 to 1635, and French, 1635 to 1648, reflected the gradual transformation from religious warfare to great power politics. The intervention of foreign powers, particularly Sweden under Gustavus Adolphus and France under Cardinal Richelieu, internationalized the conflict and reduced German territories to battlegrounds for competing European ambitions. The demographic and economic devastation was unprecedented in German history. Estimates suggest that the German population declined by 25 to 40% during the war, with some regions experiencing even more severe losses. The destruction of agricultural systems, urban centers, and trade networks created economic depression that lasted well into the 18th century. The breakdown of social order led to widespread banditry, witch hunts, and cultural trauma that influenced German literature and folk memory for centuries. Military innovations during the war, including the development of standing armies, improved firearms, and new tactical formations, revolutionized European warfare. The emergence of military entrepreneurs like Albrecht von Wallenstein created new forms of military organization that challenged traditional feudal structures. The war's brutality, exemplified by events like the sack of Magdeburg, demonstrated the inadequacy of existing international law and the need for new frameworks for regulating interstate conflict. The Peace of Westphalia, 1648, established principles of international law that would govern European relations until the Napoleonic period. The treaties recognized the sovereignty of territorial states, established the principle of non-interference in domestic affairs, and created mechanisms for peaceful dispute resolution. For German territories, Westphalia confirmed the fragmentation of political authority while maintaining the fiction of imperial unity. The settlement's religious provisions extended the peace of Augsburg's principles while adding Calvinism to the list of recognized faiths. The establishment of 1624 as the normative year for religious settlements created a baseline for property rights and religious practice that provided stability after decades of warfare. However, the exclusion of other Protestant denominations and the continued privileging of Christianity over other faiths demonstrated the limitations of early modern religious tolerance. The emergence of Prussian power. The transformation of Brandenburg Prussia from a relatively insignificant electorate into a major European power represents one of the most remarkable political developments of the early modern period. The foundation of Prussian greatness lay in the systematic state-building efforts of the Hohenzollern dynasty, beginning with the great elector Frederick William, 1640 to 1688, and culminating in the military genius of Frederick the Great, 1740 to 1786. The Great Elector's reign established the fundamental characteristics of the Prussian state: a powerful military, efficient bureaucracy, and mercantilist economic policies. The creation of a standing army during the 30 Years' War provided the foundation for Prussian military power, while the development of a professional civil service ensured effective governance. The elector's religious tolerance, exemplified by the welcome extended to Huguenot refugees after the revocation of the Edict of Nantes, attracted skilled craftsmen and intellectuals who contributed to Prussia's economic and cultural development. Frederick William I, 1713 to 1740, the Soldier King, systematized these developments through comprehensive administrative reforms that created the most efficient state apparatus in contemporary Europe. The General Directory, General Directorium, centralized administrative functions, while the canton system provided a reliable source of military recruits. The king's obsession with military efficiency created an army that, relative to population, was the largest in Europe, earning Prussia the distinction of being not a country with an army, but an army with a country. The Prussian military system was built on innovative recruitment, training, and organizational methods that revolutionized 18th century warfare. The development of iron ramrods, improved drill techniques, and disciplined officer corps gave Prussian forces decisive advantages in battlefield effectiveness. The military's integration with civilian society through the canton system created a militarized culture that permeated all aspects of Prussian life. Frederick the Great's reign, 1740 to 1786, marked the full flowering of Prussian power and the emergence of the state as a major European player. The Silesian Wars, 1740 to 1748, demonstrated Prussia's military capabilities while securing the wealthy province of Silesia, which provided the economic foundation for further expansion. Frederick's survival during the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, against a coalition including Austria, France, and Russia, established Prussia's reputation as a military power capable of challenging the established European order. Austrian Habsburg response and the dualism. The rise of Prussian power fundamentally altered the balance within the Holy Roman Empire and created the German dualism that would dominate Central European politics until 1866. The Austrian Habsburg response to Prussian expansion involved comprehensive internal reforms designed to strengthen the monarchy's administrative, military, and economic capabilities while maintaining Austria's position as the traditional leader of the German states. Maria Theresa's reign, 1740 to 1780, initiated fundamental reforms that modernized the Austrian administrative system and strengthened the monarchy's financial position. The pragmatic sanctions' successful defense during the War of Austrian Succession demonstrated the dynasty's resilience, while the subsequent administrative reforms created a more centralized and efficient state apparatus. The establishment of the Theresian Military Academy and the reform of the tax system provided the foundation for Austrian military revival. The co-regency and subsequent sole rule of Joseph II, 1780 to 1790, represented the high point of Habsburg enlightened absolutism. Joseph's ambitious reform program included the abolition of serfdom, religious tolerance through the patent of toleration, and comprehensive administrative rationalization. However, the emperor's radical approach generated widespread resistance, particularly in Hungary and the Austrian Netherlands, demonstrating the limits of enlightened despotism in multi-ethnic empires. The Austrian educational reforms under Maria Theresa and Joseph II created a comprehensive system of public education that rivaled Prussia's achievements. The establishment of normal schools, gymnasiums, and universities provided the infrastructure for cultural and intellectual development. The University of Vienna became a major center of medical education and scientific research, while the Habsburg court attracted leading intellectuals and artists from across Europe. The Austrian economic policies reflected the empire's diverse character and complex geographical situation. Unlike Prussia's focused military economic system, Austria pursued policies designed to integrate its varied territories while maintaining traditional social structures. The development of manufacturing in Bohemia and Moravia, combined with agricultural improvements in Hungary, created economic growth that supported the empire's great power status despite its internal diversity. The Enlightenment in German territories. The German Enlightenment, Aufklärung, developed distinctive characteristics that reflected the Holy Roman Empire's decentralized political structure and complex religious heritage. Unlike the French Enlightenment's anti-clerical orientation or the English empirical tradition, German Enlightenment thought emphasized systematic philosophy, educational reform, and the harmonization of reason with religious faith. The University of Halle, under the leadership of Christian Thomasius and August Hermann Francke, became the first major center of German Enlightenment thought. Thomasius's advocacy of German as a scholarly language and his emphasis on practical philosophy challenged traditional academic practices, while Francke's pedagogical innovations influenced educational theory throughout Europe. The Halle Pietist movement combined Enlightenment rationalism with intense religious devotion, creating a synthesis that profoundly influenced German intellectual development. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz's philosophical system provided the theoretical foundation for German Enlightenment optimism about the compatibility of reason, faith, and social progress. His concept of the best of all possible worlds and his mathematical and scientific achievements established German intellectual leadership in systematic philosophy. Leibniz's correspondence with leading European intellectuals created networks that facilitated the exchange of ideas across confessional and political boundaries. The Göttingen School, centered around the University of Göttingen, represented the institutional culmination of German Enlightenment scholarship. The university's emphasis on empirical research, critical historical method, and practical application of knowledge attracted students from across Europe. Scholars like Johann David Michaelis, August Ludwig Schlosser, and Johann Christoph Gatterer developed methodological innovations that revolutionized biblical studies, statistics, and historical research. Immanuel Kant's critical philosophy, developed primarily in Königsberg, provided the philosophical synthesis that resolved many Enlightenment contradictions while establishing the foundation for German idealism. Kant's Copernican revolution in philosophy, his ethical system based on the categorical imperative, and his political theory of republican government profoundly influenced subsequent German intellectual development. The famous essay, What is Enlightenment?, articulated the movement's core principles while acknowledging the practical limitations of reason in political and social reform. Economic and social transformation. The 18th century witnessed fundamental economic and social changes in German territories that prepared the ground for later industrialization and political transformation. The gradual abolition of serfdom, beginning in Prussia and spreading to other German states, reflected both Enlightenment humanitarian ideals and practical economic considerations about agricultural productivity and labor mobility. The development of manufacturing industries, particularly in textiles, metallurgy, and luxury goods, created new forms of economic organization and social stratification. The putting out system, Verlag system, connected rural and urban production while creating proto-capitalist relationships between merchant entrepreneurs and dependent producers. The growth of banking and credit systems, exemplified by institutions like the Frankfurt banking houses, provided the financial infrastructure for expanded commercial activity. Agricultural improvements, inspired by English models and promoted by cameralist theorists, increased productivity and supported population growth. The introduction of new crops, particularly the potato, provided more reliable food supplies and enabled demographic expansion. Systematic crop rotation, improved livestock breeding, and the consolidation of scattered holdings created the foundation for agricultural capitalism. The emergence of a reading public, laissez publicum, reflected broader social and cultural changes associated with urbanization, educational expansion, and religious pluralism. The proliferation of newspapers, journals, and books created new forms of public discourse and political participation. Coffee houses, reading societies, and lending libraries provided venues for intellectual exchange that transcended traditional social boundaries. Social mobility increased significantly during this period, particularly through military service, bureaucratic advancement, and commercial success. The Prussian emphasis on merit-based promotion in the army and civil service created opportunities for talented individuals regardless of noble birth. The growth of professional occupations, including law, medicine, and teaching, expanded the middle classes and created new forms of social identity. The French Revolutionary Wars and Napoleonic transformation. The French Revolution's impact on German territories was profound and multifaceted. challenging traditional political structures while accelerating social and economic changes that had been developing throughout the 18th century. The initial German response to the revolution was divided, with some intellectuals welcoming the revolutionary ideals, while established authorities viewed French developments with growing alarm. The War of the First Coalition, 1792 to 1797, brought revolutionary armies into German territory and demonstrated the military superiority of the new French system. The rapid collapse of traditional military formations before French revolutionary enthusiasm and tactical innovations shocked German military establishments and forced fundamental reconsiderations of military organization and political structure. The Peace of Campo Formio, 1797, and subsequent territorial reorganizations began the process of political rationalization that would culminate in the Holy Roman Empire's dissolution. The cession of the left bank of the Rhine to France eliminated numerous small ecclesiastical and secular territories, while the compensation of displaced rulers through the secularization of church lands, Reichsdeputationshauptschluss of 1803, further simplified the German political map. Napoleon's victory at Austerlitz, 1805, and the subsequent creation of the Confederation of the Rhine, 1806, effectively ended the Holy Roman Empire's 1,000-year existence. The Confederation's 16 member states, under French protection, initiated comprehensive reforms modeled on French revolutionary and Napoleonic innovations. The introduction of the Napoleonic Code, the abolition of feudalism, and the establishment of uniform administrative systems modernized German society while subjecting it to French hegemony. The Prussian defeat at Jena-Auerstedt, 1806, and the subsequent French occupation catalyzed the most comprehensive reform program in Prussian history. The reforms associated with Baron von Stein, Prince Hardenberg, Gerhard von Scharnhorst, and Wilhelm von Humboldt transformed Prussia's administrative, military, educational, and social systems. The abolition of serfdom, the introduction of municipal self-government, the creation of a citizen army, and the establishment of the University of Berlin represented a systematic attempt to regenerate Prussian society through liberal reforms. The Wars of Liberation, 1813 to 1815, marked the culmination of German resistance to French hegemony and the emergence of German nationalism as a major political force. The Battle of Leipzig, 1813, the Battle of the Nations, involved forces from across German territories and represented the largest battle in European history before the 20th century. The subsequent invasion of France and Napoleon's defeat created opportunities for German political reorganization that would shape the continent's future development. The German Confederation and the Restoration Order. The Congress of Vienna, 1814 to 1815, established a new European order based on the principles of legitimacy, balance of power, and conservative restoration following the revolutionary and Napoleonic upheavals. For German territories, the Congress created the German Confederation, Deutscher Bund, a loose association of 39 sovereign states designed to maintain German unity while preserving princely sovereignty and Austrian leadership within the German system. The Confederation's structure reflected the complex balance between unity and particularism that characterized German political development. The Federal Diet, Bundestag meeting in Frankfurt provided a forum for diplomatic coordination while carefully limiting federal authority to matters of mutual defense and the maintenance of internal order. The Confederation's fundamental weakness lay in its inability to act decisively on issues requiring unanimous consent, particularly regarding constitutional reform, economic integration, or military modernization. Austrian leadership under Prince Metternich established the ideological framework for the Restoration period through the Holy Alliance and the Concert of Europe. Metternich's system aimed to prevent revolutionary movements through international cooperation and internal surveillance. The Carlsbad Decrees, 1819, promulgated following the assassination of the conservative playwright August von Kotzebue by the student Karl Ludwig Sand, established press censorship, university surveillance, and political repression that characterized the Restoration period. The constitutional movements in southern German states, including Baden, Württemberg, and Bavaria, represented attempts to balance monarchical authority with liberal participation. These constitutions, while limited in scope, established precedents for representative government and civil liberties that would influence subsequent German political development. The constitutional experiments also created experienced liberal politicians who would play crucial roles in the revolutions of 1848. The Zollverein, customs union, initiated by Prussia in 1834, represented the most successful attempt at German integration during the Confederation period. The gradual expansion of the customs union to include most German states created a common market that facilitated economic development while establishing Prussian leadership in German economic affairs. The Zollverein's success demonstrated the possibility of German unity through practical cooperation rather than political revolution. Industrialization and social change. The Industrial Revolution reached German territories gradually during the first half of the 19th century, accelerating dramatically after 1840 and transforming economic structures, social relationships, and political possibilities. The development of steam power, railroad networks, and factory production created new forms of wealth and poverty, while challenging traditional social hierarchies and economic relationships. The railroad boom of the 1840s and 1850s provided the infrastructure for economic integration and industrial development. The completion of major rail lines connecting Berlin to Cologne, Hamburg, and other commercial centers facilitated the movement of goods, people, and ideas across political boundaries. Railroad construction also stimulated heavy industry, particularly iron and steel production, while creating new forms of investment and corporate organization. The emergence of industrial capitalism created distinct social classes whose interests often conflicted with traditional political structures. The industrial bourgeoisie accumulated wealth and political influence that challenged aristocratic dominance, while the growing working class experienced the harsh realities of factory labor, urban overcrowding, and economic insecurity. The development of industrial cities like Essen, Dortmund, and Dusseldorf created new social environments characterized by class segregation and cultural tensions. Agricultural transformation paralleled industrial development, with the completion of peasant emancipation and the rationalization of farming methods, increasing productivity while displacing rural populations. The enclosure of common lands, the consolidation of holdings, and the introduction of scientific agriculture created a more efficient agricultural system while generating surplus labor for industrial employment. The rural-urban migration that resulted from these changes created the demographic foundation for industrial expansion. The emergence of working-class consciousness and organization represented a fundamental challenge to existing political and social arrangements. Early workers' associations, mutual aid societies, and craft guilds evolved into more sophisticated forms of labor organization. The influence of socialist ideas, particularly those of Karl Marx and Ferdinand Lassalle, provided intellectual frameworks for understanding industrial capitalism's social consequences and organizing opposition to its inequities. The Revolution of 1848 and its aftermath. The revolutionary wave that swept across Europe in 1848 found particularly fertile ground in German territories, where economic distress, political frustration, and nationalist aspirations converged to challenge the Restoration order. The February Revolution in Paris provided the spark, but German revolutionary movements reflected distinctly German concerns about constitutional government, national unity, and social reform. The March Revolution in Berlin forced King Frederick William IV to accept constitutional limitations on royal authority and to support German unification efforts. Similar movements in Vienna led to Metternich's resignation and the convening of constituent assemblies in both Austria and Prussia. The revolutionary enthusiasm of March 1848 seemed to promise fundamental changes in German political structure and the realization of liberal and nationalist aspirations. The Frankfurt Parliament, elected through the first democratic elections in German history, represented the most ambitious attempt to create German unity through constitutional means. The Assembly's debates over the form of German government, the extent of German territory, and the relationship between unity and freedom revealed fundamental tensions within the liberal movement. The distinction between Greater German, Grossdeutsch, and Lesser German, Kleindeutsch, solutions reflected not only practical political considerations, but fundamental questions about German identity and European integration. The Frankfurt Constitution, completed in March 1849, represented a sophisticated attempt to balance democratic participation with effective government. The document's provisions for civil liberties, federal structure, and constitutional monarchy reflected liberal political theory while attempting to accommodate German particularism. However, the Constitution's rejection by Frederick William IV and other German rulers demonstrated the limitations of constitutional idealism when confronted with entrenched political interests. The revolution's failure resulted from multiple factors, including the division between moderate and radical liberals, the recovery of conservative forces, and the fundamental weakness of revolutionary organization. The Prussian rejection of the imperial crown offered by the Frankfurt Parliament symbolized the defeat of liberal nationalism and the reassertion of traditional authority. The subsequent period of reaction saw the systematic dismantling of constitutional gains and the restoration of conservative political control. Prussian hegemony and German unification. The failure of liberal nationalism in 1848 created opportunities for alternative approaches to German unification based on Prussian power and conservative leadership. Otto von Bismarck's appointment as Prussian minister-president in 1862 marked the beginning of a systematic campaign to achieve German unity through blood and iron rather than parliamentary debate and constitutional negotiation. Bismarck's strategy relied on the careful manipulation of European diplomacy to isolate potential opponents while creating circumstances favorable to Prussian expansion. The Danish War, 1864, fought in cooperation with Austria, demonstrated the possibility of German military cooperation while securing the duchies of Schleswig-Holstein for German control. The subsequent dispute over the administration of these territories provided the pretext for the Austro-Prussian War, 1866. The 7 Weeks' War, 1866, eliminated Austrian influence from German affairs and demonstrated the superiority of Prussian military organization and technology. The decisive victory at Königgrätz, Sadova, resulted from innovations in military technology, particularly the needle gun, and superior strategic planning by Helmuth von Moltke. The war's outcome dissolved the German Confederation and created the North German Confederation under Prussian leadership. The North German Confederation represented a compromise between Prussian hegemony and German particularism that preserved state sovereignty while creating effective federal institutions. The Confederation's constitution, largely Bismarck's creation, established a federal structure with a strong executive, the Prussian king as federal president, and a democratically elected parliament, Reichstag, with limited powers. This system balanced democratic participation with authoritarian control in ways that would characterize the later German Empire. The Franco-Prussian War, 1870 to 1871, completed the unification process by bringing the southern German states into the federal system and creating a common German identity through shared military victory. The war's origins in disputes over the Spanish succession provided Bismarck with the opportunity to present Prussia as defending German honor against French aggression. The Ems Dispatch, skillfully edited by Bismarck, to appear more provocative than the original precipitated French declarations of war that unified German public opinion behind Prussia. The military campaign demonstrated the superiority of German military organization, strategic planning, and technological innovation. The encirclement and capture of Napoleon III at Sedan, followed by the siege of Paris and the proclamation of the German Empire at Versailles, represented the culmination of Prussian hegemony and the achievement of German unity under conservative leadership. The war's outcome established Germany as the dominant power in continental Europe while creating lasting Franco-German antagonism. The German Empire, structure and development. The proclamation of the German Empire on January 18, 1871, in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, represented the culmination of centuries of German political fragmentation and the beginning of a new era in European politics. The empire's federal structure preserved the sovereignty of constituent states while creating effective central institutions capable of coordinating policy across German territories. The Imperial Constitution of 1871 established a complex federal system that balanced Prussian hegemony with the autonomy of other German states. Prussia's dominance was ensured through its control of the presidency, Kaiser, the chancellorship, and a blocking minority in the Federal Council, Bundesrat. However, the democratic election of the Imperial Parliament, Reichstag, through universal male suffrage, provided a forum for popular participation and political debate that often challenged government policies. Bismarck's system of government relied on his unique position as both Prussian minister-president and imperial chancellor, allowing him to coordinate policy between state and federal levels. His political strategy involved the careful manipulation of competing interests, liberal, conservative, Catholic, and socialist, to maintain governmental stability while preventing the emergence of unified opposition. The Iron Chancellor's diplomatic genius maintained European peace while consolidating German power through alliance systems and colonial expansion. The Kulturkampf, 1871 to 1887, represented Bismarck's most serious domestic political challenge, as his attempt to subordinate the Catholic Church to state authority provoked massive resistance from German Catholics. The conflict over civil marriage, educational control, and clerical appointments created a powerful Catholic political movement through the Center Party, while demonstrating the limits of state power in religious affairs. The eventual resolution of the Kulturkampf required significant compromises that enhanced Catholic political influence within the empire. Economic development during the Empire period transformed Germany into Europe's leading industrial power. The completion of German unification eliminated internal trade barriers and created a large domestic market that facilitated industrial expansion. The development of heavy industry, chemical production, and electrical engineering established German technological leadership while creating new forms of corporate organization and labor relations. The social consequences of rapid industrialization created political challenges that tested the empire's stability. The emergence of a large industrial working class, concentrated in cities like Berlin, Hamburg, and the Ruhr region, provided the social foundation for the Social Democratic Party's growth. Despite the anti-socialist laws, 1878 to 1890, the SPD became the largest party in the Reichstag by 1912, demonstrating the political awakening of the German working class. Wilhelmina Germany and the path to war. Kaiser Wilhelm II's accession in 1888 and Bismarck's dismissal in 1890 marked the beginning of a new era in German politics characterized by personal rule, aggressive nationalism, and the abandonment of Bismarck's cautious diplomatic system. The young Kaiser's belief in divine right monarchy and Germany's world mission, Weltmission, created tensions with parliamentary government and peaceful international relations. The new course in foreign policy abandoned Bismarck's alliance system in favor of a more aggressive pursuit of German interests. The non-renewal of the reinsurance treaty with Russia, the naval rivalry with Britain through Admiral Tirpitz's fleet program, and the pursuit of world policy, Weltpolitik, through colonial expansion and diplomatic intervention created international tensions that ultimately led to the First World War. German colonial expansion in Africa, the Pacific, and China reflected the empire's growing economic power and international ambitions. However, Germany's late entry into the colonial scramble resulted in the acquisition of territories that were economically marginal, while creating diplomatic conflicts with established colonial powers. The colonial experience also contributed to the development of racial theories and imperial ideologies that would have tragic consequences in the 20th century. The domestic political system became increasingly polarized as traditional conservative forces confronted the growing influence of social democracy, Catholic political organization, and ethnic minorities. The failure to democratize the Prussian three-class voting system, the persistence of military influence in civilian affairs, and the Kaiser's erratic interventions in politics created governmental instability that undermined effective policymaking. The July crisis of 1914 demonstrated the bankruptcy of Wilhelmine diplomacy and the disastrous consequences of Germany's international isolation. The blank check offered to Austria-Hungary following the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand reflected the German leadership's belief that a short, victorious war would solve both domestic and international problems. The Schlieffen Plan's failure and the development of trench warfare on the Western Front created a military stalemate that would consume German society's resources and ultimately destroy the empire. The First World War and imperial collapse. Germany's entry into the First World War represented the culmination of the tensions and contradictions that had been building within the Wilhelmine system. The initial enthusiasm for war reflected in the Burgfrieden, civic peace, that united all political parties behind the war effort, soon gave way to disillusionment as the conflict developed into a prolonged struggle of attrition that strained German society to its breaking point. The failure of the Schlieffen Plan and the development of two-front warfare created military challenges that German resources could not sustain indefinitely. The naval blockade imposed by the British fleet gradually strangled German trade and created severe shortages of food and raw materials. The turnip winter of 1916 to 1917 demonstrated the war's impact on civilian populations and contributed to growing war weariness and political opposition. The military leadership's assumption of virtual dictatorial power under the Third Supreme Command of Hindenburg and Ludendorff represented the militarization of German politics and the subordination of civilian authority to military necessity. The introduction of unrestricted submarine warfare and the Zimmermann Telegram's proposal for a German-Mexican alliance brought the United States into the war, ultimately ensuring Germany's defeat. The political consequences of military failure included the gradual democratization of the German political system as the military leadership sought to transfer responsibility for defeat to civilian politicians. The parliamentary reforms of October 1918, which made the Chancellor responsible to the Reichstag rather than the Kaiser, represented the constitutional changes that conservatives had resisted for decades. The November Revolution of 1918 began with naval mutinies in Kiel and spread rapidly across Germany as workers' and soldiers' councils seized power in major cities. The Kaiser's abdication and flight to Holland marked the end of the Hohenzollern monarchy and the beginning of Germany's first experiment with democratic government. The armistice signed on November 11, 1918, ended the fighting, but left Germany facing the challenges of military defeat, economic collapse, and political revolution. The Weimar Republic, democracy in crisis. The proclamation of the German Republic on November 9, 1918, by Social Democrat Philipp Scheidemann marked the beginning of Germany's first democratic experiment. But the circumstances of its birth created fundamental challenges that would plague the Weimar Republic throughout its existence. The revolution's incomplete character, the persistence of conservative elites in key positions, and the association of democracy with military defeat created a democracy without democrats that faced immediate challenges to its legitimacy. The Constitutional Assembly that convened in Weimar in 1919 created one of the most democratic constitutions in contemporary Europe, with provisions for civil liberties, social rights, and extensive democratic participation. However, the Constitution's weaknesses, particularly Article 48's emergency powers provision and the proportional representation system that encouraged political fragmentation, provided the constitutional mechanisms through which democracy would eventually be destroyed. The Treaty of Versailles imposed harsh terms that created lasting resentment and provided ammunition for nationalist opposition to the democratic system. The War Guilt Clause, territorial losses including Alsace-Lorraine and the Polish Corridor, military restrictions, and massive reparations payments created economic and political pressures that undermined democratic stability. The treaty's provisions were seen by many Germans as a dictated peace, diktat, that violated principles of national self-determination and fair treatment. The early years of the Republic were marked by revolutionary upheavals that challenged both the democratic government and the traditional social order. The Spartacist uprising in Berlin, the Bavarian Soviet Republic, and numerous strikes and political assassinations created an atmosphere of civil war that polarized German politics. The murder of prominent Republicans like Matthias Erzberger and Walter Rathenau by right-wing extremists demonstrated the violence of anti-democratic opposition. The hyperinflation crisis of 1922 to 1923 destroyed middle-class savings and created social chaos that further undermined confidence in democratic institutions. The occupation of the Ruhr by French and Belgian forces following Germany's default on reparations payments created a national crisis that brought the Republic close to collapse. Gustav Stresemann's policy of fulfillment and the introduction of the Rentenmark stabilized the currency, but at enormous social cost. The Golden Age and its limitations. The period from 1924 to 1929 represented the Weimar Republic's most successful years, characterized by economic recovery, international reconciliation, and cultural flowering. The Dawes Plan's rescheduling of reparations payments and American loans provided the foundation for economic stabilization, while diplomatic successes like the Locarno Treaties and Germany's admission to the League of Nations restored international respectability. Gustav Stresemann's foreign policy of understanding, Verständigung, sought to revise the Versailles settlement through negotiation rather than confrontation. The Locarno Treaties, 1925, guaranteed Germany's western borders while leaving open the possibility of peaceful revision in the east. The Kellogg-Briand Pact and the Young Plan further reduced international tensions while addressing German concerns about reparations and sovereignty. The cultural achievements of the Weimar period established Germany as a center of modernist innovation in art, literature, architecture, and intellectual life. The Bauhaus School revolutionized design and architecture, while writers like Thomas Mann, Bertolt Brecht, and Alfred Döblin created literary works that captured the complexity of modern urban life. The film industry, centered in Berlin, produced masterpieces like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Metropolis that influenced global cinema. However, the Republic's apparent stability masked fundamental weaknesses that would be exposed by the Great Depression. The economy's dependence on American loans created vulnerability to international economic fluctuations, while the persistence of anti-democratic attitudes among key elites meant that democratic institutions lacked deep roots in German society. The growth of extremist parties on both left and right demonstrated the continuing polarization of German politics. The cultural conflicts of the period, particularly the clash between traditional and modern values, created social tensions that extremist movements exploited. The debate over cultural Bolshevism and the reaction against modernist art and literature reflected deeper anxieties about social change and national identity. These cultural conflicts would later be exploited by Nazi propaganda to mobilize support for radical solutions to Germany's problems. The rise of National Socialism. The Great Depression's impact on Germany was particularly severe due to the economy's dependence on foreign loans and the persistence of structural problems from the war and inflation periods. Unemployment rose to over 6 million by 1932, while industrial production collapsed and agricultural prices fell dramatically. The economic crisis created social desperation that radical political movements exploited to gain support. The Nazi Party's transformation from a fringe movement to a mass party reflected both the crisis of democratic politics and the effectiveness of Nazi propaganda and organization. Adolf Hitler's charismatic leadership, combined with sophisticated propaganda techniques and paramilitary organization through the SA, Sturmabteilung, created a movement that appealed to diverse social groups united by their opposition to the existing system. Nazi ideology combined extreme nationalism, racial anti-Semitism, anti-communism, and promises of economic recovery in a package that resonated with German anxieties and aspirations. The concept of the Volksgemeinschaft, people's community, promised to overcome class divisions and create national unity, while the identification of external enemies, Jews, communists, foreign powers, provided scapegoats for Germany's problems. The political maneuvering that brought Hitler to power demonstrated the failure of traditional conservative politicians to understand the Nazi threat. Franz von Pappen's belief that he could control Hitler as chancellor while serving as vice-chancellor reflected the conservative elite's fatal underestimation of Nazi ruthlessness and organizational capabilities. President Hindenburg's appointment of Hitler as chancellor on January 30, 1933, represented the legal revolution that destroyed German democracy. The Enabling Act of March 1933, passed under conditions of intimidation and with the support of conservative parties, provided the legal foundation for Nazi dictatorship. The elimination of trade unions, political parties, and federal state governments proceeded systematically, while the coordination, Gleichschaltung, of social organizations created the institutional framework for totalitarian control. The Third Reich, totalitarian rule and war. The establishment of Nazi totalitarian rule involved the systematic destruction of civil society and the creation of new institutions designed to mobilize the entire population for the regime's ideological and political goals. The development of the SS as a parallel state organization, the creation of concentration camps for political prisoners, and the establishment of the Gestapo as a secret police force provided the instruments of terror necessary to maintain control. Nazi economic policies combined public works programs, rearmament, and autarkic trade policies to reduce unemployment and prepare for war. The construction of the Autobahn system, the development of synthetic materials industries, and massive military spending created economic recovery that enhanced the regime's popularity. However, these policies also created structural imbalances and resource shortages that could only be resolved through territorial expansion and plunder. The implementation of Nazi racial ideology through the Nuremberg Laws, 1935, and subsequent anti-Semitic legislation systematically excluded Jews from German society and prepared the ground for later genocidal policies. The November 1938 Kristallnacht pogrom demonstrated the regime's commitment to violent anti-Semitism while testing public reaction to anti-Jewish violence. Nazi foreign policy pursued territorial expansion through a combination of diplomatic pressure, military intimidation, and ultimately military conquest. The remilitarization of the Rhineland, 1936, the Anschluss with Austria, 1938, and the annexation of the Sudetenland, 1938, achieved major territorial gains without military resistance. However, the invasion of Poland in September 1939 finally precipitated the European war that Hitler had been preparing for since coming to power. The early German victories in Poland, Norway, Denmark, the Low Countries, and France seemed to vindicate Nazi ideology and military strategy. The development of blitzkrieg tactics, combining tanks, aircraft, and motorized infantry, revolutionized warfare, and enabled rapid territorial conquest. However, the failure to defeat Britain and the decision to invade the Soviet Union created a two-front war that ultimately exceeded German capabilities. The Holocaust and crimes against humanity. The Nazi genocide of European Jews represented the most systematic and extensive crime against humanity in recorded history. The evolution from legal discrimination through ghettoization to mass murder reflected the regime's radicalization and the implementation of its core ideological commitment to racial anti-Semitism. The invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941 marked the beginning of mass murder operations as Einsatzgruppen units systematically killed Jewish communities across Eastern Europe. The Wannsee Conference of January 1942 coordinated the final solution: the plan to murder all European Jews through industrialized killing methods implemented in specially constructed extermination camps. The network of concentration camps, extermination camps, and combined concentration-extermination camps created a system of unprecedented scope and efficiency for mass murder. The camps at Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor, and other locations represented the industrialization of genocide, with gas chambers capable of killing thousands of people daily. The Holocaust was not limited to Jews, but included the systematic murder of other groups deemed undesirable by Nazi ideology, including Roma and Sinti, disabled individuals, Polish intellectuals, Soviet prisoners of war, and Jehovah's Witnesses. The Action T4 euthanasia program provided both the ideological justification and technical methods later used in the Holocaust. The complicity of ordinary Germans, collaborating governments, and local populations across occupied Europe demonstrated the breadth of participation in genocidal crimes. However, resistance also existed, from the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising to the activities of rescue networks like those organized by Oskar Schindler and Raoul Wallenberg. Defeat, occupation, and division. Germany's military defeat in May 1945 resulted from the overwhelming superiority of the Allied coalition and the exhaustion of German resources through total war. The Soviet offensive from the east, combined with Anglo-American advances from the west, created an impossible strategic situation that not even Germany's desperate development of new weapons technologies could resolve. The immediate aftermath of defeat involved the complete collapse of German state authority and the implementation of Allied occupation policies designed to denazify, democratize, demilitarize, and decentralize German society. The Potsdam Conference, July 1945, established the framework for occupation, including the division of Germany into 4 zones, administered by the United States, Soviet Union, Britain, and France. The Nuremberg Trials, 1945 to 1949, established important precedents in international law by holding individuals accountable for war crimes, crimes against peace, and crimes against humanity. The trials provided a legal reckoning with Nazi crimes while establishing historical documentation that would be crucial for later educational and memorial efforts. The growing tensions between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union gradually transformed occupation policies and led to the division of Germany into 2 separate states. The formation of Bizonia, 1946, and Trizonia, 1948, created the economic and political foundation for West German independence, while Soviet policies in the Eastern Zone established a communist system modeled on the Soviet Union. The Berlin Blockade, 1948 to 1949, represented the first major crisis of the Cold War and demonstrated the impossibility of 4-power cooperation in governing Germany. The successful Allied airlift and the eventual Soviet abandonment of the blockade established West Berlin as a symbol of freedom and Western commitment to German democracy. The Federal Republic, democracy and prosperity. The establishment of the Federal Republic of Germany in May 1949 marked the beginning of Germany's most successful democratic experiment. The Basic Law, Grundgesetz, drafted by the Parliamentary Council under the presidency of Konrad Adenauer, created a stable constitutional framework that balanced federal and state authority while protecting individual rights and democratic institutions. Adenauer's chancellorship, 1949 to 1963, established the fundamental orientations of West German foreign and domestic policy. The policy of Westbindung, Western integration, aligned the Federal Republic with NATO and the European integration process, while the concept of chancellor democracy created strong executive leadership within a parliamentary system. The economic miracle, Wirtschaftswunder, under economics minister Ludwig Erhard, transformed West Germany into one of the world's most prosperous societies. The social market economy combined free market principles with social welfare provisions and regulatory frameworks that created both economic dynamism and social stability. The currency reform of 1948, the Marshall Plan aid, and the gradual liberalization of trade restrictions provided the foundation for sustained economic growth that continued through the 1960s. The development of democratic political culture in West Germany involved both institutional learning and generational change. The 1968 student movement challenged authoritarian traditions and demanded confrontation with the Nazi past, while the emergence of new political movements like the Greens reflected the diversification of democratic participation. Reunification and contemporary challenges. The peaceful revolution in East Germany during 1989, culminating in the fall of the Berlin Wall on November 9, 1989, created the opportunity for German reunification after 40 years of division. The rapid collapse of the East German state reflected both the failure of communist economic policies and the success of peaceful protest movements inspired by developments in other Eastern European countries. Chancellor Helmut Kohl's policy of rapid reunification through the extension of West German institutions to the former East Germany created immediate political unity, but also enormous economic and social challenges. The economic transformation of the eastern states required massive financial transfers and created unemployment and social disruption that persisted for decades. German reunification also required extensive diplomatic efforts to gain international acceptance and address concerns about German power in Europe. The 2+4 Treaty, 1990, provided the international legal framework for reunification while confirming Germany's commitment to European integration and peaceful relations with its neighbors. Contemporary Germany faces challenges that reflect both its historical experiences and current global developments. The integration of immigrants and refugees, particularly following the 2015 refugee crisis, has created social tensions while also demonstrating Germany's commitment to humanitarian values. The rise of the Alternative for Germany, AfD, as a right-wing populist party represents the first successful challenge to the post-war democratic consensus since the 1950s. Germany's role in European integration has evolved from a junior partner seeking rehabilitation to the European Union's de facto leader during crises like the Eurozone crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. The tension between German economic interests and European solidarity continues to shape debates about the future of European integration. The memory of the Nazi period remains central to German political culture and international relations. The development of a sophisticated memorial culture, including institutions like the Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe and the extensive network of concentration camp memorials, reflects Germany's commitment to confronting its historical responsibilities while educating future generations about the dangers of authoritarianism and racial hatred. The challenges of climate change, digitalization, and demographic change test Germany's capacity for adaptation and reform. The Energiewende, energy transition, represents an ambitious attempt to transform Germany's energy system while maintaining economic competitiveness. The country's response to these challenges will shape not only Germany's future, but also its continued role as a leading European and global power. The history of Germany demonstrates both the possibilities and the dangers of modern political development. From the fragmentation of the medieval Holy Roman Empire through the horrors of the Nazi period to the success of democratic reconstruction and reunification, German history provides crucial lessons about the conditions necessary for peaceful development and the consequences of political failure. Understanding this history remains essential for comprehending not only Germany's contemporary role, but also the broader patterns of European and global development in the modern era.